Welcome to another episode of Check Your Shelf. I'm Paul,
I'm Steve.
and today we're going to talk about a little story Steve read recently by an author you may have heard of.
The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I was in Half Price Books the other day, which is a local used bookstore. I think that's a chain, right?
It's a chain. I'm like a local used bookstore because we have one like a half hour from here.
It feels local because you go in there and it was packed. I was really impressed. But I was able to pick this up. It's called Tolstoy Selected Stories, Leo Tolstoy. And, Tolstoy. I always feel good about myself when I read something by one of these famous Russian authors or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, Tolstoy. But I had heard about one of his stories recently, which we'll talk about today, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, or Ivan Ilyich. It seems like if you just stress a different syllable, it makes it sound like you're pronouncing it correctly.
I'm no good with the Russian accent. So
Leo Tolstoy.
all of your accents eventually just turn into Australian. So
yeah, that's right. Or mine just turned into Southern.
Oh, true.
There's a little thing today. We're going to talk about Leo Tolstoy.
Leo Tolstoy will kick your ass.
He was Leo Tolstoy, kick your ass. He's this old boy from Russia, Well, just a little bit. Everything I know about Leo Tolstoy can be fit in a page and a half at the front of this collection of Leo Tolstoy stories. He was born 9 September 1828 at the age of 75 years old. And, yeah, I'm just looking here in the book. I don't know much about Leo Tolstoy, but he was an aristocrat in Russia. Keep in mind, the 1800s Russia was the Russian Empire. It had not yet become, the revolution didn't come until the 1917. So this is Tsarist Russia days, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's wearing those big hats and marching around going, no, that's
the days of Ivan Kravinov, from Spider-Man.
Or as I like to pronounce it, Ivan Kravinov. He went to college and then he joined the army. He was in the Crimean War. Remember the Crimean War, charge of the Light Brigade, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then he actually dropped out of college because he was apparently what they say reckless.
Yeah, like I said, I was before we recorded, I was looking up pictures of him to maybe put a costume together, and I found some young pictures of him, and I'm like, he's got that. He's pretty reckless.
He's pretty reckless. And then he grew a big long beard and became apparently kind of religious. In his later years, or just mid to later years, like really, because the Russian Empire was very Orthodox Russian Christianity is a thing, right? Russian Orthodox Church, and apparently he was, about as Orthodox as they come. But you wouldn't be able.
Lenin took care of that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to. And Stalin finished the job, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't really be able to tell it from his writings because apparently when he's just really good at writing from the point of view of his characters and not trying to put his own preachiness or I'm going to tell you how to live into it. It's more like this is what this character was going through. And if the character wasn't religious or was a flawed character, which the best stories are about flawed characters, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so.
You might have, if you're sitting there like Tolstoy, who is it? What did he wrote Anna Karenina, which I always thought was a person, but no, that was a novel. And he wrote War and Peace. And I'm like, War and Peace, if I want to read some Tolstoy, War and Peace is like 8 of these put together.
Yeah, it's
War
a
and
big
Peace
doorstop.
War and Peace is so long, it's used as like a metaphor for how long things are. Right? It's like that's like War and Peace.
I really spoilers. I don't think anybody actually read it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
They just like to say they read it.
It's like Woodstock.
Maybe there was a movie and they watched it.
If you added up all the people that claimed to have been at Woodstock, it would take like it would be greater than the population of the continental United States of the time.
Maybe some professors profess to have read it.
I could go to ChatGPT and just have it tell me about it. That'd be nice. Anyway, that's the extent of what I know about Tolstoy, other than this novella that I read.
Well, I have limited exposure to Tolstoy. Several years ago, I was doing some research. One of my favorite types of vampires is a Vordelak, and there was a really good movie back in the late '60s called Black Sabbath that Black Sabbath took their name from. It was a triptych, and one of the stories was the family of the Vordelak, which is the story that Tolstoy wrote. And the a Vordelak is a creature that it's a vampire that feeds on its loved ones. And in the story, Boris Karloff is the Vordelak, and he returns from the dead this is kind of the story of the Vordelak as well. He returns from the dead, comes to the house, and like the family let him in, but they're kind of trying to keep him away, and his grandson is over like by the fireplace, and in one of the worst lines ever written for like ever, he's trying to call his son over, and the kid's mom was like, "No, don't go over there." Like whatever Boris, whatever the kid's name was, and the Karloff goes, "What? Can't a grandfather fondle his grandchild?" I'm like, well, that didn't age well.
No.
But anyway, I wanted to. I've got this idea for, but having taken a trip through Springfield Township a couple of years back and just how dead and ugly it looked, I got this idea where I wanted to have a Vordelak come to this little small, county in the middle of America. And so I was doing some research on the Vordelak, and I discovered that Tolstoy had written that story. And I read the story, The Family of the Vordelak, and then I found out it's based on a Pushkin poem from a little bit earlier. And I wanted to find it. So I went to the library, and I was talking to the librarian, and she was, what I was trying to do and how I was looking for an English translation of this Russian poem by Pushkin. And the whole while, she's got like 10 books scattered all over the table, and we're going through them all. This little man in like one of those brown jackets with like the patches on the elbows, he comes up to the table like real sheepishly, and there's this really tall young woman standing behind him. And he's like, I can't help but overhear that you're looking for a Pushkin poem. And I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for a English translation of this particular Pushkin poem. And he goes, that's really interesting. I tutor Russians on how to speak English, and I'm tutoring her. And I look up, and oh man, she's Russian as Russian can get. She's got the cheekbones. It's like 30 out, but she's dressed like it's 10 degrees. She got the big heavy coat, And he's like, well, by chance, what poem are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for the one he wrote about the Vordelak. And she just goes, and like takes off running.
The Vordelak, not the Vordelak.
In all the confusion, I never did find a translation at the library, but I have managed to track one down. So maybe I'll write that story one day.
All right. Well, not related to Vordelaks, but I was listening to the reason I picked up this book and read The Death of Ivan Ilyich is I was actually listening to a couple of meditation gurus. One's an author who follows meditation, and the other is like a meditation teacher and stuff. And just one of them asked the other one, like, how often do you read The Death of Ivan Ilyich? And he's like, I read it at least once a year, just when I feel like I need to like scare myself back into mindfulness. I was like, holy crap. So I immediately looked it up and read it.
He had that answer chambered.
Yeah, he did. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that this episode is not longer than it would just, take somebody to just go ahead and read it. It's pretty short. It's about maybe 2 hours, 15 minutes. You can probably read it, 2.5 hours, depending on how fast you read. The audiobook I saw was about 2.5 hours. So it's an easy, quick read. But as we talked before, this is not like entertainment. It's more art, and art, good art. Good art makes you want to see more good art. Great art makes you take a look at yourself. So
before
this
we
one
go
definitely
on,
does it.
Before we go on with this, though, Steve,
Yeah,
I just got to tell you that Half Price Book is on top of their game when it comes to their price stickers.
yeah.
Yeah, they come right off really easily.
Oh, got it. I was like, what's on this price sticker that's so cool? I thought the best thing they could do is like, it's $4.99. Somewhere on this book, whether it's their sticker or somewhere else, it should say full price is $9.98.
Yeah.
All right, so we're not going to make the thing longer than but
Yeah.
there will be spoilers. Spoiler alert. Ivan Ilyich, the main character in this book, does die. And it's funny because it starts with him. It starts with him dying and ends with him dying. So,
that's a long
spoiler.
death.
I'll go through the plot and everything, but the main thing and the reason I picked it up is the themes are like mortality. And we talk, I don't know, ever since I turned 40 or something, we've been talking about, awareness of our own mortality.
Yeah.
And authenticity, expectation society puts on you, the plan you had for your life and how you thought it would go, because it was what you taught. We were taught this is a life well lived, right? This is what you're supposed to do in life. And you go about, and sometimes the plans work out, sometimes they don't, usually they don't. And then everybody at some point is faced with their own mortality, and you kind of look back and go, wait a minute, was that correct? Did I have a good, well-led life? And you deal with that, right? So that's what this book deals with, So it opens, as I said, like a group of, Ivan Ilyich is a well-respected, bureaucrat. And, he goes around doing bureaucracy things. Even Tsar Nicholas or Tsar, whoever was Tsar at the time, needed, people to go around and do stuff. And he was one of the people that went around and do stuff, like government bureaucrat, right? And it starts out with a group of his colleagues, like on a break during some big trial or whatever. And they get the paper and they go, Ivan Ilyich died. And they're like, oh, yeah, he was a good guy. Yeah. Who's going to get his post? Like, now his post is empty. Somebody's going to get, and it goes through, everybody's like, oh man, my wife's brother will be happy because he's been saying I haven't been progressing fast enough in my career. My wife will finally get off my case because she'll be like, my dad said you were no good. And now that'll show her because I'll get Ivan Ilyich's post. But then maybe somebody else will get it. So I got to figure out how to position myself to get his. So immediately they're all just like right back in. Like it starts out like, oh, that's too bad. He was a good guy and not that old. And then they go back and then they immediately go into, it's like they always say, you're sweating, you're bleeding for your employer, right? And you're giving them all this loyalty. And I guarantee you, your seat, if you were to die suddenly, your seat would not be warm before they'd have somebody else there replacing you.
Yeah, I tell my kids, I'm like, don't put everything into a job that'll replace you before you're in the ground,
Exactly. And that's how this one starts.
Okay.
I kept having to remember it's 1886 when he wrote this thing. 1886, 140 years ago, right? It's like when we talked about Of Mice and Men, like these timeless things, these stories that deal with human conditions. That's why they're timeless, right?
Yeah.
And then the next phase is a flashback on his life, and it goes through who he is, how he started out, how he went to school to get a good job, found a good wife, and did all the things you're supposed to do. Slowly
Mm-hmm.
rose up through the ranks, became a mid-level bureaucrat. It's like the kid said during that Super Bowl commercial in 1999 for Monster.com, I want to claw my way to middle management. And, and he did. I mean, he did the things you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
He had a few women on the side, which it's funny because it's kind of like what you're supposed to do. Like he'd kind of be like, had a woman in this town, woman in that town. That's what you do. That's what people do, right? And then
Well, when you look like Tolstoy, you do.
yeah, that's right. We're reckless. I'm gonna go be reckless. This is the reckless phase of life. And then the reckless phase, kind of comes to a close, and he gets an appointment near St. Petersburg, which is the capital, and he's like, okay, well, this is how this works. Now I get a house. The house needs to be good for entertaining because that's what good mid-level bureaucrats do. And that'll help me continue to climb the ladder. My wife will take care of the house and the entertaining and the kid and all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But while he's getting the house ready, he like bumps his kidney or something. Like he slips on a ladder or whatever and bumps his kidney. But he doesn't think anything of it. But over the next few weeks, his health just deteriorates and deteriorates until, he's on his deathbed. And then that's where I said he dies in the beginning, dies in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So toward the end is like, it is funny because it sort of constricts. It starts out 3 weeks to live, a week to live, a few days to live, a day, last hour, and it's kind of interesting how it kind of funnels in and the world just kind of becomes smaller and smaller for him toward the end. And one of the wild things toward the end is this is like less than an hour before he's dead, less than a couple hours, right? He comes to this realization. He's examining his life. First of all, he's mad at everybody around him because they're annoying to him. Then he starts and he starts like, just let me die already. And he's in terrible pain. And he's just lashing out at people. But then he starts to realize what a burden he must be. And he's like, well, they're going to be better off when I die. And then he's like, but he looks back on his life and he's like, was it correct? Did I live well? Did I live a good life? And he's like, that wasn't me. The person climbing the ladder, the person being the bureaucrat, the person keeping women in every town because he thought that's what you're supposed to do. And so he's just like, that just wasn't me. That was my imitation of what I thought you were supposed to be and what you were supposed to do. With less than a couple hours to go in his life, he's like, yeah, I haven't done the right thing. But you know what? There's still time. There's still time to live correctly. Knowing, and he knew by this time he was about to die. It's not like he thought, oh, I'll get through this. And like, when somebody almost dies, oh, if I just get through this, I'll do everything right,
Lord,
no,
he loved me.
He knew he was going to be dead soon. Yeah. And he still said, and that hit me like a ton of bricks because I was like, well, shit, I got a good, probably with medical technology, 25, 30 years. So anything in my past that I'm like, well, that wasn't right. I wasn't authentic enough. I wasn't, I wasn't living correctly or whatever. I'm like, I got like 25, 30 years to correct. He only had like maybe, 25, 30 minutes. So, but once he made that realization and that the right thing to do for the next however long he had left was just to be himself and be real, and the pain went away and his fear of death went away. And he was like, and it wasn't like, I'm not afraid to die as in he made some big realization about death. It was that he made some big realization about life, that he was like, suddenly death had no power over him.
Right.
Death had power over him when he thought life was about getting to a certain station in life and achieving certain things.
Yeah.
It's like, what if I died?
Racing. Yep.
Yeah, he was racing. Like you're racing the clock, right? Suddenly the clock had no meaning for him. And he just felt joy. And he told his son, he told his wife, and he's just like and then as he's taking his last breath, like his wife or somebody says, well, he's finished. And his last words were, nope, death is finished. Meaning now I'm dying and death is here, but death is now,
Mm-hmm.
now depending on what translation you read, and this is the
Yeah,
fun thing
there's
about
there's that.
depending on what translation you read, this thing that he said toward the end that was like, I haven't lived, I haven't lived correctly, but there's still time to rectify it. That's how
Mm-hmm.
some translations read. I didn't read a bunch of translations, but I did look a few things up.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on which translation you read, by the way, if anybody speaks Russian, let us
Yeah,
know. Go read it in the original
yeah.
Russian. Tell us.
If that little professor is still, if he's found our channel, first of
Or
all, I'm sorry what I
his
did to your
student.
student. Second
Poor
of
luck.
all, let us know. Yeah.
He either said what I choose to believe he said was, I haven't lived correctly, but there's still time to rectify it. Some say that I've done the wrong thing, but now I can do the right thing. Meaning, which I think takes a lot of the meaning away from it, because
Mm-hmm.
that to me just means, oh, I've got time to say I'm sorry to everybody and to make
Yeah.
up for what I did bad things to people, and I can say I'm sorry. There's still time to say I'm sorry. That's how that kind of feels to me. Whereas I
Mm-hmm.
really prefer the life well lived. There's always time to live a life well lived. So
Yeah.
that's how I choose to believe Tolstoy meant
Yeah.
it.
You're probably right.
I do have a question for our listeners. In addition to, if you read Russian, how do you interpret
Yes.
how you interpret it? But the other one is, he didn't really say what it would mean to live a like truly meaningful life. He
Mm-hmm.
just talked about like that wasn't it.
Yeah.
And he does say, but I don't know what the right thing would have been either.
Right.
So what is the right thing? So that's a good question. I don't know if
Yeah.
you have thought about that, but certainly if
Yeah.
anybody's like, what does that mean? What does it mean to live a meaningful life?
Well, I've thought about it since my heart attack a couple years, like two
I'll
years
bet.
ago. Good Lord, it's coming up on 2 years. And to me, I think more it's just like there is no right answer. It's kind of like the joke is the purpose of life is to live it.
Hmm.
That's how I take it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a life well lived is a, a life you lived, as opposed to this is what we have to do. The expectations of what everybody, keeping up. Well, what did we have? Keeping up with the Joneses. Keeping up appearances. Basically, uh, what Dick Van Dyke's house looked like, but not who he really was.
Yeah. In the words of the prophet Stanley Hudson, life is short, drive fast, and leave a sexy corpse. I suppose I asked the question, I had to give an answer too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some things, it's funny because as an engineer, I was trained that there ought to be a specific answer to questions, a
Yeah.
precise answer to questions. I think it's okay to sometimes not have a clear answer to something,
Mm-hmm.
right? I remember when my wife's grandpa died. He was 96, maybe 97 or 93. I don't know, somewhere in his 90s,
Mm-hmm.
probably 97. But he lived, at his funeral, there was no, yeah, we'll miss it. We miss who he was. Nobody expected him to live, forever. But people were sad. It's like, we're going to miss him. We're going to miss him at things, at functions and stuff. But the sorrow, it was more like joy because this guy lived. I just kept saying it was a life well lived.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't because he accomplished a bunch of stuff. It wasn't because he raised the perfect family.
Mm-hmm.
Lord knows he didn't raise the perfect family. Anyway, he didn't. It wasn't because it wasn't because he raised the perfect family. It wasn't. It was simply that he lived. He was him. Like
Mm-hmm.
this, everything about him was Gil. His name was Gil, and there was nothing. You never wondered what else might be going on behind those kind eyes. Right?
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
just kind. He liked to have a good time. He liked to drink sherry. He liked to just, love his family, be around his family, eat good food. I'm like, boy, if any of us could live that life, we should
Mm-hmm.
be we should feel very fortunate, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I have done a much better job of that in recent years. Um, to get real for a second, the taking care of a family, like it's not. I'm not telling everybody to sell all your possessions and go live in the, you know,
Yeah.
get high on ayahuasca. Although I did want to mention, during the last few hours of his life, Ivan Ilyich was on a lot of opium. So some of this joy that he felt and the loss of the pain and the fear of death
Mm-hmm.
may have been the opium.
It may have been the opium talking.
But you know, you still got to live your life. You still got to make a
Mm-hmm.
living. You still got to provide for your family, and that could cause you to do some things that are not exactly what you would do if you could just do whatever you wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little more complex than just, oh, live life, have, you know, leave a sexy corpse. It's a little bit more complex than that, but
Yeah.
it's worth thinking about. Out of 4 and 3 and 2 and 1, I go with a 3.5. And not because it was bad. He's like, you're gonna rate Douglas Adams a 5 and Tolstoy. I'm not talking about quality of writing and, you know, skill. Clearly,
Yeah.
this dude's craft. It's like the man once said, I would have written a shorter letter, but I ran out of time. It is harder to write a good short story probably than a novel. I've not written either. So, well, I've written a good short story, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
but it's hard to write something that short. So the
Yeah.
guy, I'm not rating his craft. I'm just more like, you know, my own preference.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'll read it between now and next week because next week I want to do a book haul video.
Okay.
But I'll read it between now and next week and give my quick, my 2 cents. All right. Well, I suppose we'll close the book on this story this week. I'm Paul,
I'm Steve.
and the next time you're looking for something to read,
Check your shelf. And now for your moment of ASMR.
there it goes. There it goes. Look at it. Look at it. Oh man, nasty.